It's 1943. While battles raged overseas, Victory Gardens at home fought hunger with one powerful crop, the tomato. Salad star, cooking staple, and canning champion, it was grown with clever wartime tricks that still work today. Here's how World War II gardeners kept their tomatoes victorious with tricks that still work today. The Great Soil Heist. With commercial fertilizers, particularly nitrogen-based ones, redirected to bomb factories, American Victory Gardens faced a major problem. How do you grow fresh veggies without decent dirt? The answer was a nationwide black market operation dubbed the Great Soil Heist, a grubby rebellion against scarcity that required stealing back fertility from trash heaps and even their own bathtubs. Yep, you heard right, bathtubs. What they did was transform waste into black gold with precision. Kitchen scrap compost became black market currency for tomato-loving soil microbes. Cool, soap-free bathwater, the grayer the better, was applied at soil level to fertilize the soil. The result of all this? Gardens overflowing with tomatoes, and in turn, hunger was defeated. So, if you want your home gardens to be a lot more victorious, it all starts with a nice little raid on your compost bin. The Florida Weave. Let's set the scene, shall we? The World War raged on. You've managed to nurture some victory tomatoes from seed under milk jug greenhouses. They survived blackout nights and carrot-top fertilizer. But not this. 6-foot vines collapsed, surrendering to blight and slugs. Until a solution comes all the way from Florida bean fields to Brooklyn backyards. They called it the weave. What it really was salvation for your tomatoes. Gardeners would scavenge salvaged pipe offcuts and even birch saplings. Anything 6 to 8 feet long and rigid worked miracles in the garden. With these stakes driven deep into the soil at row ends and twine woven diagonally around plants, vines stood at attention, letting the breeze dry dew and stopping fungal blights. 80 years later, and the weave still remains a great tomato support system. Now, go out and weave some victory. Suckering. How do you think these victory gardens survived the covert coup staged by suckers, through pruning with precision and bare-knuckled ruthlessness? Enter the art of botanical surgery. Suckering. Suckers are unwanted shoots that grow from the roots or base of a plant, especially trees and shrubs, often diverting energy from the main plant and potentially altering its shape or health. So, yeah, they're bad news. One rogue sucker could reduce yields by up to 30%. That was edible treason, so gardeners would simply pinch off these leafy shoots between stems, forcing plants to focus energy on fruit, not foliage. No tactile intel required, but timing was key. You'll have to start strong before the plant has grown way too many limbs to prune, and the rules still haven't changed. Marigold Defence. Suckers weren't the only underground saboteurs victory gardeners had to plot against. There were also nematodes, microscopic soil-dwelling worms sucking roots like kids draining a sundae, only far less charming and twice as destructive. And it gets even worse. With chemical pesticides diverted to the war efforts, gardeners needed a secret weapon. And that's where the marigolds came into play. A brilliant, bloom-filled biological warfare tactic that turned cheerful flowers into tomato bodyguards. And here's how. The roots of the French marigold secrete alpha-terthionyl, a natural nematode neurotoxin. So, gardeners would dig trenches about 1 to 2 feet away from the tomato beds and plant marigolds. This got the job done. So, deploy these marigolds, Commander. Turn your garden into a fortress of blooms. Biowarfare at its finest. Eggshell Fortresses. How about a dual-purpose defense strategy? When Victory Garden tomatoes faced a two-front war, blossom end rot-sabotaging fruit from within, and slugs mounting nightly attacks on tender seedlings, gardeners had to turn to crumbling, calcium-rich battlements forged from breakfast's aftermath. They had to turn to eggshell fortresses. Families saved every shell. When mixed into the planting hole beneath seedlings, they gradually release calcium into the soil, a vital nutrient that supports cell wall strength and helps prevent blossom end rot. Scattered on top of the soil, coarsely crushed shells create a rough barrier that may discourage slugs and snails from reaching tender stems and leaves. While not foolproof, the sharp edges can be an effective part of an organic pest control strategy. So they got minerals for the soil and crawler control all from breakfast waste. That kind of resourcefulness can't just be lost to time, can it? Planting deep. World War II came with a seedling shortage so dire that gardeners treated every tomato seed like a trooper behind enemy lines. One loss is a strategic blow. Green-thumbed guerrillas had to deploy a radical tactic, planting tomato seeds deep. All these years later, and the deep dig doctrine remains gardening gospel. Shallow planted tomatoes were at risk of weak roots, thirsty plants, and the chance of being toppled by summer storms. So, to get their tomato victory gardens overflowing, gardeners dug horizontal trenches, not holes, up to 6 to 8 inches deep and long enough to lay seedlings sideways. Tomato stems were covered in hair-like structures that could grow into roots when they were planted. So gardeners allowed the tomato to grow a much larger root system, which helped it absorb water better during dry seasons and improved its resistance to strong winds. Always remember, the deepest roots grow the mightiest fruit. Upside-down planting. Victory gardens were booming, but one problem still remained. Space was scarce. Apartment dwellers even eyed their fire escapes with tactical intent, and a radical new tactic gained popularity: growing tomatoes upside down in buckets or pails. You're probably wondering, how did they even make it work? Well, they did defy scarcity, so they could figure this out. The idea here was to drill a hole in the bottom of a strong bucket and insert a seedling so it grows downward through the hole, and then fill the bucket with soil and hang it from a fence, trellis, or porch. This way, they could save space and minimize ground pests. So, yeah, they made it work. Tomato plants hanging like outdoor chandeliers might look weird, but for people looking for something new, it's worth giving a shot. Wood ash. The scarcity of commercial fertilizers led victory gardeners to discover newer and possibly even better ways to combat the nutrient mutiny tomatoes faced. From the ashes of scarcity rose an unlikely hero: wood ash. Tomato rot was rampant due to calcium deficiency. Potassium shortages caused spindly growth, and slimy invaders breached defenses at night. Wood ash, however, contains these key nutrients required for fruit development and strong flowering. Ash delivered potassium without ration stamps, integral for fruit density. Also, sharp crystals shredded soft bodies. So, households would then gather and save wood ash in buckets or tins. When the time came, a light sprinkling was enough to save rows of tomatoes. So, next time you clean the fireplace, salute. These gray ghosts once fueled victory garden resilience. Newspaper trick. Before commercial weed barriers, home front heroes had to discover another way to smother weeds, so they deployed yesterday's news. Literally, newspaper blankets became a common tool in victory gardens, turning daily battle reports into botanical barricades. After people read the paper, they found a second use for it as mulch. Weeds steal about 30% of the soil nutrients and water from tomatoes. Now, it might not mean so much for your home garden, but then it was a battle against scarcity. So they'd gather and lay layers of wet newspaper flat in between tomato rows or around individual plants. Then covered it up with a little hay or grass clippings. This combination blocked all light, which was weed genocide. It also locked in soil moisture, biodegraded by fall, and most importantly, costed them nothing. Still, the cheapest organic mulch you could get even today. String and bucket drip systems. When the skies held rain hostage and taps ran dry to prevent tomato vines from wilting, victory gardeners beat the system with physics. In a stroke of ingenuity, gardeners created this network of buckets and strings that kept roots hydrated even when no one was looking. All they needed for this was a bucket or even a repurposed paint can, a cotton rope salvaged from clotheslines or mops, and a shovel. Now they'd bury this bucket next to a tomato squad, lid on, by the way. Then they cut a 12-inch rope per plant, burying one end up to 6 inches deep at the root zone. Next, they punched a small hole near the bucket's bottom and passed the rope through it. Finally, they filled the bucket with water and just waited for capillary action to carry water slowly to the roots. Easy peasy. Cotton fibers acted as microaqueducts, wicking water directly to roots via capillary action. Thank us later for the science lesson. Soldiers stormed the battlefield, and victory gardeners stormed physics. Milk trick? Victory gardeners often stared helplessly as blight, tomato tyranny in fungal form, blackened leaves. Here's the thing, fungal diseases like early blight or powdery mildew have always been a major challenge for tomato farmers, especially during humid times. With commercial fungicides inaccessible to a lot of home gardens, victory gardeners deployed a pantry paradox: sour milk. Yep, you heard just right. How about a little science lesson? Here goes. Spoiled milk's lactic acid and lactoferrin proteins disintegrate fungal cell walls and boost calcium uptake, preventing blossom end rot. Clabbered milk was no longer waste, it was tomato armor. So they mixed sour milk with rainwater, got bug sprayers, and got to spraying. Whether or not they fully understood the science behind this method, we'll never know. What we know, and they knew for sure though, was that it kept their victory gardens overflowing with tomatoes. So here's to the milk that fought the blight. Epsom salt. Yellowing leaves on tomato plants are usually a sign of nutrient deficiency, and one nutrient that plays a major role in healthy leaf color is magnesium. Victory tomatoes began sporting these yellow-striped leaves, a botanical betrayal called chlorosis. As usual, many gardeners had to become resourceful. So they cracked open medicine cabinets and deployed Epsom salt as an emergency IV drip for starving plants. And it worked wonders. Epsom salts were used as a great source of magnesium sulfate, which is a core component of chlorophyll, activates enzymes for fruit development, and strengthens cell walls against blight. Mix 1 tablespoon of Epsom salt per gallon of water and pour it at the base of the plants, or spray it lightly. And voila, deficiency corrected. Excess salts cause leaf scorch, so look out for that. Companion cropping. Do you know plants have friends and enemies? Well, wartime gardeners knew this, and most importantly, exploited it. No pesticides, no fertilizers, no space. But one timeless planting trick fixed all of these. Say hello to companion planting, a strategy that made sure tomatoes grew alongside floral bodyguards, aromatic spies, and sacrificial pawns. Companion cropping, in all its glory, was a common-sense practice based on years spent gardening rather than some scientific theory. Let's take carrots, for example. Planted right next to a tomato squad, its deep roots help loosen the soil beneath tomatoes. Here's another, basil. Planted 6 to 12 inches away, these guys repel flies and mosquitoes and are even believed to enhance the flavor of your tomatoes. Nasturtiums planted 2 to 3 inches away acted as the sacrificial pawns, as aphids preferred them over tomatoes. While nations signed treaties overseas, wartime gardeners created their own alliances in the garden, alliances that still stand strong even today. Planting time trick. Back then, to maximize their yield, victory gardeners orchestrated botanical invasions down to the minute. They weren't just planting tomatoes. It was like planning D-Day, but with way more compost. With frost lurking and summer squalls threatening to drown the harvest, timing became the ultimate weapon. Here's how planting time became the ultimate strategy. Wartime gardeners relied on the signs from nature itself to guide their timing. For instance, one of the best markers in several regions was this. When the elderberry tree began to bloom, it was time to move the tomatoes outdoors. This wasn't a superstition, it was an observation based on years spent gardening. Elderflower blooms means that the soil is warmer and nighttime temperatures have stabilized, making it perfect for tender plants. Planting time was everything when growing tomatoes. Plant too early and Jack Frost court-martials your seedlings. You could get stunted growth or pole damage. Plant too late and your tomatoes won't ripen. Waiting until the elder bloom helped avoid these problems. T-shirt ties. When tomatoes grow tall and start to produce fruit, they need some sort of support, otherwise the stems bend and break under that weight. As money became tight and twine vanished, a new conscription was born, not of soldiers, but of outgrown sleeves and frayed hems. When cotton became the Victory Garden MVP, most valuable plant tie, enter the T-shirt tie, a thrifty, repurposed solution that turns laundry piles into lifelines. In search of support for their tomato stalks, wartime gardeners turned to whatever soft material they could. We're talking old T-shirts, pillowcases, or cotton sheets. These were then cut into strips and used as tomato ties. These ties had to be gentle because tomatoes are fragile plants. You wouldn't want to bruise or snap them. The cloth was wrapped loosely around the main stem and secured to a support, and voila! The soft fabric would ensure the stems weren't rubbed or scarred during windy days. Fast forward 80 years, and gardeners still turn to this simple tactic. What can we say? It's timeless. Pollinator Pub. Do you know that Victory gardeners once used the pollinating power of bees to their advantage? When honeybees went missing after harsh winters, the fruit yield dropped severely. This was quite the crisis because fewer bees meant less pollination. The solution, though, to roll out the floral red carpet. This floral counteroffensive is called Pollinator Pubs, strategic plantings that lured bees with nectar cocktails, turning backyards into insect nightclubs where tomatoes were the main act. Gardeners planted borage and sunflowers along tomato rows. Their flowers are instant bee magnets. Their nectar lured pollinators, boosting fruit yield by 70%. Even today, your home gardens could do with some pollination, so here you go. Roll out the nectar carpet. Your garden will become the buzz of the town in no time. Pie tins. Here's the thing. While wartime gardeners were fully focused on preventing diseases and the creepy crawlies from running wild, birds were still able to launch a sneak attack from the skies. Birds coming for ripe fruits were a frequent problem. In those times, they had to be resourceful, and that's where pie tins came into play. Gardeners relied on this simple tactic to deter these feathered guests, hanging shiny objects to scare them away. The most popular choice then was aluminum pie tins. For starters, they offered 360-degree reflectivity to disorient pests. Plus, they made clattering sounds which added another level of deterrence. Sometimes even old spoons or strips of foil got the job done. Fish trick. Wartime gardeners had to come up with a bunch of alternatives to commercial fertilizers. Every single one has its own pros and cons. Well, in areas where fishing and gardening were closely tied, a nose-wrinkling tactic emerged, burying fish scraps between tomatoes. It wasn't pretty, but boy did it work. And then, that's all that mattered. So, how about a little lesson on the science of stench? Tomatoes needed nitrogen for its leaves, phosphorus for their roots, and potassium for their fruit. Rationing meant it couldn't get all these. And then came the fish fix. By burying fish scraps, gardeners were able to get their tomatoes all these nutrients. Decomposed fish guts are bursting with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It was a feast for the roots. Plus, the fish oil repelled root-munching nematodes. While the tactic faded post-war, along with tolerance for backyard stink, Alaskan gardeners still swear by salmon heads. And if they can get past the smell, you can too. What smells like defeat to you is just victory to your plants. Copper wire. Have you ever heard about how World War II gardeners electrocuted blight with scrap wire? Victory tomatoes faced an unrelenting enemy. Late blight spores blowing from farm to farm, blackening leaves overnight. With fungicides inaccessible, resourceful gardeners unleashed a shocking tactic, one passed down in older gardening circles. Salvaged copper wire strung through soil like underground tripwires against disease. Copper ions are well known for their antifungal properties. So, inserting a small piece of copper wire through the base of the tomato stem would slowly release its ions into the plant and help prevent diseases like blight. All they needed was a thin piece of wire. This unorthodox tactic kept victory gardens brimming with tomatoes. So, electrify your soil today. Seed saving. One thing that was even more important than wartime gardeners' battles with pests and diseases was making sure they stuck the right seeds in the ground. And proper seed saving ensured this, especially within families that grew the same varieties year-round. If a tomato plant produced good fruits, great flavor, and was productive, its seed had to be set aside for the next season. The process was simple too, but required full focus. Firstly, the seeds were retrieved from the tomato, then placed in a jar with some water to ferment for a couple of days. This was necessary to break down the gel coating covering each seed. Afterwards, they were rinsed, dried on paper towels, and stored. Heirlooms that made it to today exist only because someone took the time to make it so. This isn't the kind of practice that should get lost to time. Garlic spray. One of the most effective, simple, time-tested tricks to keep tomatoes healthy was garlic spray. Gardeners would crush several cloves of garlic and soak them in water overnight, creating a strong natural extract. In the morning, the liquid was strained and poured into a spray bottle, with just a drop of soap added so it would cling to the tomato leaves. Once a week, they misted their plants with this homemade solution. Aphids, whiteflies, and spider mites couldn't stand the sharp odor or bitter taste, leaving the tomatoes untouched. This trick not only kept pests away, but also avoided chemicals, giving families a steady harvest of ripe, juicy tomatoes all season. Soil sterilization. You've heard about sterilizing medical equipment, types of food packaging, baby bottles, but what of soil? The concept of soil sterilization sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Well, for victory gardeners, it was one way of eliminating damping off fungi, ambushing seedlings and weed seeds, plotting insurrections in every furrow. And what's more is that they didn't sterilize their soil using steam sterilizers. Homefront tacticians opened a surprising new front: the kitchen oven. Kitchens became labs. They'd first dampen the soil slightly, then spread it in metal roasting pans, covered tightly with foil, and bake it up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. Finally, let it cool completely, and voila, your soil's been sterilized. It worked, preserving beneficial microbes while nuking foes. While the oven tactic faded post-war, its principles endure in every sterile seed-starting mix. Victory Garden Schools. Not everyone was a natural at keeping tomatoes overflowing in their victory gardens. Yep, there were some major rookies who faced several garden crises and lost badly. City folks needed crash courses. The solution to this? Victory Garden Schools, crash courses where people learn to snipe suckers and defeat diseases. They taught everything from soil testing with litmus paper, adding lime to raise pH or sulfur to lower pH, to reading NPK on manure sacks and pest counterinsurgency. This created a generation of scientifically literate gardeners, a generation that passed this legacy down. Victory schools turned nervous novices into tomato generals. Today's community gardens and urban farms owe their roots to those makeshift classrooms. Milk jug greenhouses. When wartime gardeners missed their planting time and their seedlings faced the merciless onslaught of frost, they had a cost-effective stealth defense system, the unlikely hero, the humble milk jug. In a stroke of genius, gallons of plastic were drafted into service as miniature greenhouses, turning sidewalks and stoops into rows of tomato incubators. Why milk jugs, you're wondering? Well, they're cheap for starters. The air trapped inside created a microclimate, perfect for tomatoes. And the U.S. produced 4 billion milk jugs annually, plenty to salvage. All they had to do was cut the bottom off, place it over the seedling, and press the rim about 1 inch into the soil. Cap off for venting on warm days, cap on for frost protection. They'd use it until the plant outgrew the jug or the nights were reliably warm. While modern gardeners have row covers and heat mats, the milk jug cloche remains a timeless zero-winter sowing tech. No overwatering. Now, here's the most important rule about tomato planting, a rule that ensured the success of tomato planting in Victory Gardens, a rule that's been repeated year after year, even now, 80 years later. Never overwater the plants. It's basic, but crucial. And here's the science behind it. When tomato leaves stay wet for too long, they become more prone to fungal diseases like blight. Plus, overwatering creates bland, watery fruits. So, let the soil dry slightly, 1 to 2 feet deep between waterings. Waterings should always be done at the base early in the morning or late in the evening. Victory gardeners always obeyed this one rule. Today's garden resistants still echo these hacks. These tricks weren't just wartime hustle, they were brilliant, sustainable adaptations. So, honor this dirt-under-the-nails ingenuity. How many of these tomato tricks did you grow up using? Tell us what you think in the comments. If you learned something today, why don't you hit that subscribe button?